Hello and welcome to Off the Record. Zack and I taped this episode about a month ago, and we were saving it so that we would have something to air if one of us couldn't do an episode one week. Some of the timeline may not be right, but I think this is one of our best episodes, and it's all about the correlations and what we've seen in our favorite albums of all time. So I hope you enjoy it as much as us. It's a little longer than usual, but I think it will be worth it for you. Enjoy. The idea for this episode came about a few years ago, 10 years ago. I was making a record with the last band I was in, who's called Jet Brando, and we had about 40 songs laying around that we had recorded over the course of 5 years, and we were trying to figure out how we make the best full length possible out of it. And so I took a very pragmatic approach to how we did this. I said, let's write down all our favorite records and let's find correlations between them, and let's figure out how we make a great record. And I think that's the thing is a lot of bands walk into making a great record without having done some research on it. I think that, a lot of the time, as a record producer, band comes in like, well, we're going to do a 10-song full length and it's 70 minutes. I'm like, why? Like, what record that you like is like that? And I think it's really important for whether you're a music fan or you're a musician to know that, there's a lot of thought put into making an amazing record, and some happen by accident, but you should know what you like at a record. So Zack and I both wrote down our 13 favorite records, and there was one shared between the two of us. And we tried to find a bunch of correlations in our list of favorite records. So we took a bunch of data. I hit Wikipedia really hard. And for the next hour, we're going to talk about what are the similarities in our favorite records. And I should also say our favorite punk records, because for the sake of discussion, we left off some of the records that aren't punk that are our favorite records. I obviously had some ridiculous dance records. Zack had some mainstream pop piano records that I find disgusting, too. I hate Jack's Mannequin, Jesus.
Oh, that's my favorite, but okay.
Oh, God. But, so we figured out what is similar despite the 15 years in age difference. There's a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of dissimilarities, and we tried to see what we could extract from correlations in our music tastes of what really, really goes into making a great record. So, Zack, you want to read off the list of our favorite records? We should say this is not in any particular order. These are just our...
Yeah, no order. I think the first ones I'm going to be reading off are Jesse's, and then they transcend into mine. It'll probably be pretty easy to tell where that break occurs. And this will just take a few seconds. Refused, Shape of Punk to Come, Say Anything, Is a Real Boy, Rancid, Let's Go, Jawbreaker, 24-Hour Revenge Therapy, Texas Is the Reason, Do You Know Who You Are, Jimmy Eat World, Bleed American, Blood Brothers, Young Machetes, Waves, King of the Beach, Acceptance, Phantoms, Lifetime, New Jersey Best Dancers, Screeching Weasel, Anthem for a New Tomorrow, Fugazi, Red Machine, Taking Back Sunday.
Red Medicine.
Ooh, I read that wrong. Thank you. Red Medicine. I know a lot about Fugazi. Taking Back Sunday, Tell All Your Friends, Blink-182 Entitled, Brand New, The Devil and God Are Raging Inside Me, Thursday, War All the Time, Armor for Sleep, What to Do When You Are Dead, Mansions, Dig Up the Dead, there's a theme here, Boxcar Racer, Balancing Composer, Separation, The Dangerous Summer, Reach for the Sun, Manchester Orchestra, I'm Like a Virgin, Losing a Child, Man Overboard, Real Talk, The Wonder Years, Suburbia, I've Given You All, Now I'm Nothing, and Lydia, Assailant.
And we should say that making a list like this is so troubling because music's so important to us. Like, I realized after I made this list that I'd much rather have Bikini Kill, Reject All American, and Death from Above 1979 on this list than some of the other records I named. But this is how it goes. You had Jack's Mannequin, and I argued that that's not really a punk record, and so you swapped in Thursday, so we're all the time. It's not easy to do this, but I think it's a great sampling to just do this, even though it's not perfect.
Right, and so what's really enjoying to me is there are definitely I know what my 5 favorite albums are of all time, and those are like I can name those in order. But then all these other ones I have listed at least they are just like my favorite albums, and they're in that sense I could have listed another 10, but to me there are like my favorite albums. Like if I needed to take 5 albums on a deserted island, like I would take 5 of these that I listed, and then these other ones are somewhere to me a mixture of like changing my life music in the sense of like I didn't know this kind of music was a thing and now I really love it, or somewhere along the lines of like emotional stuff or whatever. Like there's so many different categories and subcategories that we could have dove into, but I think we each picked a representative for our like the desert islands and then this is kind of who we are surrounded by music albums.
I think that's a great way to put it. So let's get into some of the things we found in the correlations. There's no record over 60 minutes. I used to feel like, and I know you drive now, even though you were a city kid. I haven't had a car for 7 years, because I love you, New York. But there's no record over 60 minutes, but I always found when I was young that after 35 minutes, I would want to put on another record. I found any record over 35 minutes just kind of drove me crazy. But then I look on here, and there's a lot of my favorite records, and I found this the first time I did it, that almost all of my favorite records, barring Lifetime New Jersey's Best Dancers and Screeching Weasel Anthem for a New Tomorrow, are the only 2 that are under 35 minutes.
That's interesting. Yeah, for me, when I was growing, it took a while, like as I started to get a little older. So let's say like 17 or 16 to 18 or whatever, like I actually had trouble with shorter albums. Like I couldn't, so my favorite album, like Blink-182 or Devil and God, like those albums are 50 to 55 minutes. Same thing for some of the others I listed. They're all above 40 minutes. So when there was a long period of time where I was trying very hard to get myself to like newer bands from like the Philadelphia scene. So let's say like a Tiger's Jaw or Title Fight, and I couldn't understand why the records were only 20 minutes or 25 minutes. And I just couldn't grasp that. I'd listen to it and be over. And it's like, well, this isn't an EP though. It's a record. Why is it so short? And you know, it took me not that long, but it took me a little while to think about like, oh, well, not like back in the day, but like originally, like a lot of these records from a band like Lifetime, who, you know, Title Fight is hugely inspired from, like those records were also just 20 minutes. And that's interesting that we have a different point of view there, maybe because my deep dive into this music started with a record that was 40 minutes, and then my dive into a whole other world within this world with like the brand new kind of sound is 55 minutes. And I love every song on that record. And it's like, I don't feel it's too long or too short. I just feel like I have no problem listening to the whole thing. I want to. I can't stop listening to it if I start it.
For me, I can remember a thing like even when I first started working for a record label that the legal length for a full length, like in the contract, like which constituted that you handed in a full length, was 21 minutes. And that was the big thing, is that like the Lifetime records like barely made it. And I think the first record that we'd always all reference back then was Gorilla Biscuits Start Today, which is such a classic record. I'm so mad. I missed them last night at House of Fans, but I had to work. But like, you know, these short records, and there's a big part of me as a record producer and somebody who's worked on 1,500 records in my life. I think there's a great thing to making a record that you don't have to hit skip and that you just have the bare minimum of great songs and you didn't put extra stuff on there. Just, you know, no one likes filler.
Right.
I think that there's something to that. It's like, oh, well, you made 20 minutes. Like, I've never really been a big fan of that Lydia Salience record, but you have that on here. And I was shocked I never knew it because I've always heard bands come in and talk about how much they love that record, that it's, 7 songs in 21 minutes. And it's like, well, you put the bare minimum on that you had that was good here.
Yeah,
And
to me, for that's actually a good example for me with that record. Like that's that's the shortest record that I know, and that I love rather. Like that is one of my favorite records. And there was when I first got it, I actually did struggle. I was like, why is this not longer? Because it was supposed to be the band's last record, actually. So I was like, oh God, this is a perfect way to go out, because this is just an incredible record. But two, I was like, why is this not double the length? But the more I grew with that record, it's like, oh, well, they said all they need to say. And it's like a very emotionally packed 20 minutes of like not a concept story, but like a story of the band breaking up, essentially.
Huh.
And so something like that, it's like, in context, if I think about it in context, not just that I wanted a longer album, like it actually needed to just be this long or needed to be this short in a way, which is not something that we grasp as the listener necessarily, but like the band wrote like 7 songs, 6 of them with lyrics, and they all seem to be about a member that left the band, and then everything went downhill from there. And so it's like, maybe there wasn't more, and if there wasn't more, I wouldn't want filler. And so, like, I'm glad on that in retrospect, certainly.
That's really interesting. But I think, like, the one of the other correlations we came up with was, like, so 41 minutes is the average length of a record we like. So that's 6 minutes past when I feel like I usually get bored by a record. And the average is 12 songs. So Lydia was the shortest one at 7 songs. And Rancid Let's Go has 23 songs on it. It's funny because Rancid is one of those bands that's also notorious, even though they have the most amount of songs on this list. They're notorious for writing 2 records for every one they put out, and they just do B-sides or don't put out a bunch of songs. But they also have 3 songwriters, so that's a little easier. But it's kind of funny that, like, you think about it, like a band like that, they're like, okay, we wrote 46 songs. Here's the 23 best ones.
Right, and meanwhile, it still only comes out to 45 minutes.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the other nice thing about them is that they're fast and they're short. And, the other thing I would say about those guys is that, they learned a craftsmanship from working with, like, great producers. And I see it all the time with the records I produce, that the bands who make the best records are the ones who throw away the most material. Like, you got to get good at writing a lot of songs. Like, one of the things, there's this great Rick Rubin quote in that long Daily Beast article he did right after Yeezus came out, where he says to every band, he's like, I want you to write 2.5 albums for every one you put out. I think that's a lot of what makes great records. Like, the great records I've been a part of, that's it. Like, one of the records on your list, Man Overboard Real Talk, we had 2 albums worth of material. We had 40 songs to choose from, basically, on that record of what would go on it. I think that's some of what made it great.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting now, too. Jesse and I also put together one of the category cells in the Excel doc we did was the number record it was of the band's career. And I think when you factor it into what you were just saying about throwing a lot of material, if you look down our list, and all of this, by the way, will be in the show notes section of when we post this episode. I will do my best to make a prettily format everything for everyone at offtherecord.fm. But so if you factor in that to make hopefully a really great album, like, you need to be smart about your songwriting and you need to know what to choose and what to not choose. Most of the records we picked are not the band's first record. Meaning,
yeah, most of them are not. Yes, that's a good point.
Especially there's a string of mine that are, but some of them are side projects or meaning.
Well, no, only one is a side project, just Boxcar Racer.
Boxcar is a side project, but so that would have been like Tom DeLonge's 5th written record, not their first, obviously. So categorically, I would say like a lot of these albums were written not when an artist was necessarily in their prime, but they had experience writing and writing smartly and like writing well. And we have producers listed as well, and like, a lot of them are good matchups, I would say, for the songwriting. Yeah,
and so I think you're hitting on 2 things we should really get verbose on. 25 records, 8 were the first record, and then 8, our favorites, were the third record, which I thought was really interesting, but 4 were number 2, 2 were number 4, and 3 were number 5 from the band. An interesting thing, I think, with that is that the sophomore slump is real. You know, it's not often that your second record is your greatest record. But man, like number 4 is even worse, apparently. No one's making their best material after record number 5. Like we didn't have a single record on here.
Yeah, and I feel like that's for so many reasons. Like, especially in our world.
So you say so many reasons. What do you think those reasons are?
In my mind, like most of these bands are punk-rooted bands. Whether they, blow up and get popular, like truly popular, like a Blink-182 or Taking Back Sunday, is one thing. But then, like, so many of these bands, like, it's not like they're bringing in money, which means on the business sense, they may be breaking up eventually. So a lot of these bands never got to their 5th record.
Yes.
Never got to their 6th record, rather. Like, or just touched that, like, brand new, 4 records in. It'll take another 10 years for them to get to their 6th record. And we'll see, But then again, like Acceptance, that's one of your favorite records of all time. And because of business reasons, because the record leaked, they never even made it to their 2nd record. They couldn't even sophomore slump. So yeah. I think when you take in our world in, not fully, but to a brief extent, like a lot of these bands don't get the opportunity to make it there. That's either because they hate each other, or because everyone stopped liking them, or because, reason after reason. But if we were listing and I wouldn't be able to do this, but if we were listing our favorite, like, pop star albums, a lot of them make it to 10 albums because they put something out every other year to sell 1 million copies, or whatever many copies it is now. But it's interesting to me, and I think any band making it to 5 albums that are solid is kind of crazy. Like, there are only a few bands in general that have a catalog that goes so deep all the way through. And, those bands are like a Death Cab or like a Jimmy Eat World or whatever. It's a very slim list. But actually, now that I'm thinking about it more, wouldn't you say that it would almost be harder for one of a band's, let's say, 5 through 8 albums to be our favorite? Because so much having to do with favorite albums, I think, is like an intangible emotional growth thing. Like, if I listen to Blink-182's Entitled for the first time now in 2014, I don't know what I would think of it. But I know when I started listening to it in the 6th grade, it completely changed my life. And that was their 5th album. You know what I mean? Like, that's a thing, too. Who knows where we would be at any age if we heard these differently, of course.
I think that's a really good point. It's funny, I was tweeting with Johnny Minardi last night, and we were talking about, I was like, I never got into Owen, and I was saying, people tell me which Owen album I should get into first. Because I love Mike Kinsilla's work, and I love all his other bands, but that's the one I never really got into. But I was saying, like, he's like, this is what it was like emotionally, and I was like, yeah, I didn't get into a lot of sad music because I've been so happy for so many years that I kind of skipped over the emo thing from basically like 19 to 36. And, not to say I'm sad now, but I have a sad part of me. I had a breakup this year that was really hard. So I've been listening to a little bit more sad music lately. So much of this stuff is about, where you're at in your life. But an interesting part of this album thing too is that I think after a certain point, you're like, I've heard this guy do the same things for too long, and it's just not emotionally hitting me. Like, I always say, and I'm not the biggest Radiohead fan, but I like Radiohead a lot. If Radiohead or Thom Yorke makes the greatest record of their career this year, I wouldn't care because I've heard his voice too much. I'm just like, all right, dude, I've heard you do that thing you do 9,000 too many times. But funny enough, Hail to the Thief, though, one of their later, I think that's their 3rd to last record, and maybe their 6th record, I want to say, or 5th. That's my favorite one, but like now I'm just like, all right, dude, I got the point. You do that thing you do, and I'm bored with it.
Looking at our list, too, so I guess it's pretty easy to maybe it's the Waves one, but on this list of your favorites, is the Waves record the most recent release? That is one of your favorite records?
For punk, yes. But I should also say that I did a disqualifier on my list. Since I work with bands that make my favorite records, I wouldn't allow myself to put bands that I've worked with. So my favorite recent punk release would be any of the last three Menzingers records, but I did their first two records, so I can't put them on my list because I feel like there's an emotional thing of, I love those guys. They're some of my favorite people, and I don't feel like it's right to put that on there.
That is fair. So for me, I guess the most recent thing that would have popped on my list was this Mansions record, or maybe it would be Mansions or the Wonder Years record. And so at that age, so the Mansions, I would have been graduating high school, so 2011. It's curious to me, I think, just as I get older to see if like all these records stay concrete for me because I'm curious to see how they age with me, both musically, but then also emotionally, and how, I have loved a lot of records in the last few years. A really good example actually would be like On the Impossible Past by the Menzingers. That's probably my favorite album in the last 3 or 4 years. Probably, like since this Mansions record or something. And it is one of my favorite albums, but it hasn't like, I'm not taking that on a desert island with me kind of thing. I'm curious to see like how over time, and I bring this up because you have had 15 years of that time past my age, is just like, like how an album when you were 27 might still break through to you like you felt like you were 13 again. And I guess a lot of that probably has to do like with some heavy emotional stuff that everyone goes through it in different ways. But it's like, it's curious for me now, like I might love 10 albums a year, but I don't know that any of them are ever going to be my favorite album again. Compared to what I have on this list.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing for me. Like when I was making this list, is it's like there's records I've really loved in the past year or two, and I will fully admit that I'm a little bit more enthusiastic towards podcasts and books on tape than I am music these days. But like, it needs to stand a test of time for me, and like I was saying, like I was like totally mad at myself that I left Bikini Kill Reject All American off my list. And, that record came out in 1996 when I was a senior in high school. And last night I watched The Internet's Own Boy, the Aaron Schwartz story. And, I was very emotional. And the record I turn to when I'm emotional about someone dying is Reject All American. And I put on the song Rip, and I cry my eyes out, and it's a really, really important thing to me. But, some of the records, I do think that there's some records in recent history for me that I will feel that same way about in a little while. Like, I think the 1975, while it's not a punk record, I think that that's one of the most important records in my life. I didn't put it on this list because I don't think it's punk, but I know that 10 years from now, I'm still going to be listening to that record.
Right. Yeah, that I guess is where like that, not line, but whatever kind of gets drawn, where it's like, I love this record right now, currently in 2014. Am I looking to listen to that in 2024? Oh God, that'll be a long time.
So something that occurred to me that we didn't put on this list though, and I wish we did, is do you listen to every song on these records? Like I know for me that like not every song on all these records, like, Throw a Rock into the Machine on Refuse Shaped of Punk to Come. I kind of think that's a terrible song that should have been left off the record. I think the intro on Texas Is the Reason, Do You Know Who You Are, is a stupid song. There's some of the last songs on Blood Brothers, Young Machetes that I just, like, they came on at a bar that I was drinking at. I'd go, who's this? Because, like, I just don't get that far into the record. You have Brand New, The Devil and God on your list, and there's 3 songs on that list that are 3 of my favorite songs of all time. Like, what is it, Jesus Christ and Sowing Season, and like, we were kind of joking about this before the podcast, is when that record came out, it was still in the days where I would ration my hard disk space on my laptop, so I don't even have the full record ripped from when I put it on CD, so I didn't even know most of that record because I was like, I don't like a bunch of these songs, so I just won't put them on, and I don't want to waste hard disk space because I have so little of it, whereas now I rip the stupidest records I've ever heard in my life. Does a record need to have all good songs for you to call it one of your favorite records?
So I think that's a question, which is a great question. I think based on more of individual preference, like that's why I don't use Spotify how people use Spotify. Like like it gets into something like that. Like I don't make playlists. I used
Oh, really? Oh, man.
Yeah, and so I know you are.
I'm a playlist maniac.
Right, so we're different in that sense, and I think there are more people like you than there are like me. So when I was younger, like with the stuff I was listening to, I could hardly ever find more than 3 songs I liked. But if I liked 3 songs by a band, I'd consider myself liking that band. So this was when like, and it's kind of hard for me to remember some of this because it was like, I don't know, 5th grade, right? But like, if we're talking about me getting into the very early forms of pop punk, like someone gave me a Good Charlotte CD, you know, something like that, and or Simple Plan, whatever, like that kind of era, and be like, well, I really only like 3 of those songs. I'll put Good Charlotte and Simple Plan's 3 each songs into a playlist, and I'll listen to that, and then I'll move on to the next playlist of 6 other songs by 2 other bands.
You sit there and you're like, man, you know, girls don't like boys, girls like cars and money. That lyric really hits home for me.
Exactly. Yeah, 5th grade, I'm like, I feel you, Benji Madden. But then, very slowly, like, I used to have all these crazy playlists, actually. And then when I, like, even then fell in love with, like, Blink-182 and Angels and Boxcar and Plus 44, I would put all of those 4 bands in a playlist together. So I would make, like, a 300-song playlist, and I'd have it ordered. So it would start, and I still remember, I don't have these, maybe it's on my old iPod Classic. I should find that. But it would, the playlist would start with, like, Feeling This, and then a Boxcar song, and then an Angels and Airways song, and that's how it would start. And then I'd have a playlist. I haven't thought about this in so long. I'd have a playlist with Taking Back Sunday and Brand New, and like 70 times 7 would be right above There's No I in Team, stuff like that. And I was so big on playlists, but then I'm not sure where it turned, but eventually it like definitely took a turn. I listen to everything all the way through now, everything.
Huh.
If I don't like an album all the way through, like I think if there are 6 songs, if there are 12 songs on an album and I only like 4 of them, I'm like probably never really listening to those 4 songs.
So I often make a playlist of an album I like and delete the songs I don't like on it. Like, here's a perfect example. Waves, King of the Beach. The version of it I listen to, I've deleted the 3 songs I don't like. I'm also an efficiency maniac, and I'm like one of those people, I'm like, don't waste your time on anything but the greatest things in the world. So
I definitely find what I do is different than most people, for sure. Like even like someone like Thomas. Thomas loves like mixtapes, right? Like he likes doing that. He likes making those things.
But not on cassettes. He likes making playlists, you're saying.
Right. Yeah. But in the feeling,
if he did that, I'd unfriend him.
But in the feeling of like a mixtape, and so for me, I had such a point with that for sure. I would never listen to an album, and then I think it was 2009, 2010 maybe. I remember very much so like a conversation I had with my friend Emily, and she was like, "Oh yeah," like she's like, "Why are you calling this a rec? Like I don't know anyone that calls it a record." And this was even before I was like into vinyl at all, really. These albums that I'm talking about, like it was made as a record, as an album. It wasn't like back then it wasn't like a Lady Gaga song, It wasn't like a single. And she was like, "Oh wow, that's really interesting." And from then, that's probably like the first time that I can think of like, where I categorically was thinking of these albums that I loved as full pieces. So yeah, I will listen to Devil and God, and I will listen to all 55 minutes, and I will listen to Lydia and listen to all 21 minutes. It doesn't matter.
I feel so bad for you that when you listen to Blink-182 self-titled, that you have to listen to that stupid Travis Barker interlude thing.
Oh, it's fine.
I think that's one of the worst songs I've ever heard in my life, even though... and I will say this, too. That record's has some of my favorite songs of all time on it, too. And
so I can absolutely see you not liking that song or any other song, right? But to me, it's like... that album to me has a feeling, and it wouldn't feel that whole way if you removed one of the songs from it, even if I don't love it as much as another one. And that's just how I think of these albums. Like they are, I'm not saying like they're a work of art, and yes, in their own way, they are like a work of art in their own way, obviously. But to me, it's like there are certainly songs, and we can get into this next, where it's like their concept or their collection or they're all the way through. There's a meaning or not, but I've probably listened to Untitled like 500 times all the way through. God, who knows, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, that is such a concrete thing. It would be like me forgetting how to walk briefly if I skipped the 5 songs in the middle of the album. Like I wouldn't get it. Like to me, it's one cohesive thing at this point because I don't listen to them singly. I listen to them all together.
So I would say Jawbreaker, 24-Hour, Revenge Therapy. is the record I've listened to the second most in my life. The record I listened to the most was Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction because I was 12 years old when that came out. I wanted to be a cop growing up, and then I heard that record, and I was like, nope, music, and that's even the record that turned me into a record producer.
If this was a normal episode, we would definitely be calling it "I Want to Be a Cop" when I grew up. God damn.
Yeah, it's really funny. And then, I saw the Sweet Child of Mine video. I was like, these guys are so cool. And since then, my life's been ruined. The point I want to make, I've listened to that record probably the second most in my life. It's one of the most important records. Like, I was a depressed teenager, and that record, when people are like, this record saved my life, that's the closest thing I can say. I think that's cheesy to say that a record saved your life, but it was the comforting record of my teenage depression. But the funny thing is as an adult, I revisit that record all the time. It's the record I've listened to the second most of my life. I listen to about 4 songs on it now as a happy adult.
That's crazy to me. I can't fathom doing that. I would never want to listen to Untitled if I skipped any of those songs or any of these other records I listed. To me, I can't think of it in that mindset, and I can see why you do. Mm-hmm. It's so interesting that I think there are really just two different types of people musically, consumer-wise, and there's one that's I'm just going to listen to what I want, and then there's the other that's got to do the full thing. And obviously there can be crossover, but I really feel like there's two different camps.
Well, that's like anything in life. There's people who are right, there's people who are wrong, and you're wrong.
Okay. Okay.
Totally kidding. I actually think that your thing is way more noble. But to get off that tangent, I think we kind of skipped over some stuff that I think is really we should really talk about. Is that so with this thing of the first record being the the first and the third are the most common that they're our favorite records. Everybody always says, you have your whole life to write your first record, which is totally true, and that's why so many first records are there. I think there's also a thing of that the first time we hear somebody's passionate voice is great, but I think there's even a thing. So I was texting with one of the bands I've been working with lately who are seeing some success, and it's so hard to ignore what people want from you. I have this theory, and it's a lot of what my next book is about, is that what makes good music and what I've seen over the 1,500 records I've worked on is that you make great music when you just emotionally react to it and you don't think about things. I think a lot of the time why we see a sophomore slump is that a band's sitting there and they're going, everybody likes this. Let's try to please them. And it doesn't work out. You have to just emotionally react to music because no one wants to hear the music you think they want to hear. Everybody wants to hear just what you feel good about. And I think another reason that we saw the third and the fifth record be popular is somewhere around there you get good at doing what you do. And you're not thinking about people and what the reaction of the record is. And I think that that's a huge thing. And I see it so many times when we're creating records in the studio is that you gotta just, it's so cheesy, but you gotta be true to yourself and you gotta just do what you want to hear. And I think that there even is a thing of that, even we were talking about this on a previous episode, is that I think Blink-182 the self-titled or whatever you say it's called, Untitled.
Every time you say self-titled, I die a little faster.
Oh, jeez. I think they were just being really true to themselves, and they said, you know what? We can't make another album of dog farts jokes, and we just got to make the music we love, and they made an amazing record because of it. I think it didn't line up so much in the later records.
On the flip side, though, what about? And so I think we talked about you and I talking when we taped our last episode, but so then you take a band like 4 Year Strong, and this is, and they wrote their best, or they wrote their fan favorite record, Enemy of the World, and it has a very specific sound.
Let's be honest. They wrote their best record, which is Enemy of the World.
Yeah, and I love that record.
Same here.
That's one of my favorite pop punk records of all time. I think it is a perfect pop punk record in terms of and it's so good. And then they wrote another record, and no one liked that record. But so now, here we are 4 years after Enemy of the World, 4 years after Enemy of the World, and they're about to release this EP, and it sounds just like that, like Enemy of the World. And everyone, they can say they didn't, but everyone knows they made the record sound, the EP sound like that, because that's the sound everyone preferred. You don't think so? Like?
I think it's real. You know what? Like, one of the things, and not to say that I'm not part of the music pundit class, this is one of the things that really pisses me off about the Twitterati music pundit or even political pundit class. We make up a story about a record that we assume to be true because it makes so much sense to us. As somebody who's a music creator, who's sitting with the band, talking to them, staying up, getting drunk and hanging out and talking about the ideas behind the record, working with them for months beforehand, half the time when the fucking Twitterati music pundit class is saying, this is what they did this, fucking total bullshit. It's nothing like what actually happened. My take on the 4 Year Strong thing, if I put my best guess in it, I think it's stupid to guess, I think it's a stupid thing to waste your time on, is that honestly they tried to go pop with that last record, and this record is where they're being true to themselves.
Okay.
But I will say this too, that I find conversations like these totally fucking useless.
Oh yeah, we never know. It's just us pandering to each other, pandering.
Well, it's us trying to understand something, which is a good positive part of it. Like we're all trying to understand what we like and what makes us happy in music, but like most of the time it's so wrong. Like, you know, I don't want to betray any of the bands I've worked with, but like, you know, there's so many times that I read somebody saying why a record was like this, and I just have to laugh because it's the total opposite of what we've done, and that's usually the case when you're reading what music writers think happened in a certain instance. It's just the speculation is a fucking fool's game.
That's fair. I want to talk a little bit about concept albums versus normal albums. So concept albums to me have sort of become like, they're not my favorite thing, but they are like I think when a concept record is great, like you can almost not beat it to me. And that's to me.
We're the opposite on this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So out of the records I picked, 3 or 4 of them are concept records. And you know, that's a pretty solid chunk, I would say, compared to most releases.
Well, and for me it was 2.
Yeah.
And I think even the concepts on those records are pretty not conceptual. They're not like some dystopian future or songs about what to do when you're dead.
Right, yeah, and for me, if we're gonna like push it to that length, like there's Armor for Sleep, What to Do When You're Dead. That is like the ultimate concept record in my music catalog. And then beyond that, like Suburbia by the Wonder Years is very much a concept record, but much less like I am putting myself in the shoes of someone else to like write this record, and more like this is what's going on in my life. But it's a real concept and everything's intertwined. And then something like Man Overboard, as you can attest, like those were just songs they wrote. But
yeah,
even other records that aren't necessarily concept records on my list, like Balance and Composer, Separation, like there's so many allusions to like, and in the abstract, this sounds kind of dumb, but there's so many lyrics about like rain and trees, and like there are parts that interplay with each other that are not necessarily a concept, but they all leverage each other. And similar thing with like the Boxcar Racer record, like those are a collection of songs, certainly, but you know, like, and political or not, like a lot of it Tom wrote about like following 9/11. And so it's like stuff like that, like loosely held, but at the same time, like I tend to really like records that are very cohesive if they can be. And I love when there's like callbacks if they're done well. And they're typically not, but to me, when they're done well, it's just like, I just eat that up. I love that as like, that hits me harder, if that makes sense.
So we did 2 categories on this, is we did concept and then we did diverse emotionally. And so for me, I think in general, concept records are really stupid. Mm-hmm. And usually the concept is, you know, when I heard the Armor for Sleep, and I like Ben, I've known Ben for a long time, but you know, when I heard that concept, I was like, come on, son. You gotta be kidding me. And, you know, I even like songs on that record. I think Car de War is a great song, but, like, you know, we did this other category called diverse emotionally. And I think this is one of the things that bands really, really just don't think about. I like a record that feels consistent all the way through. And one of the unifying things for me is like, I can hit play on Texas is the Reason, Do You Know Who You Are? And so, like, for me, when that became my favorite record, it was like I had my heart broken for the first time. I was 19, and it was cold in winter, and I would listen to that record walking to college in New York City and just freezing my ass off and hating my life that I wasn't in my car. And, like, it all feels the same emotion. And, like, there's something so cool about, like, when a record feels consistent all the way through, you could just hit play. And, like, I think Taking Back Sunday, Tell All Your Friends is like that. Like, you just feel like this betrayal and heartbreak. And, like, I run to 24-Hour Revenge Therapy or that Texas is the Reason record when I'm upset. Whereas, like, when I'm, like, having fun, I run to Acceptance, Phantoms, and New Jersey's Best Answers because they feel the same. And I think a lot of times bands they just go, well, here's the 12 songs we wrote, instead of assembling a feeling. And I remember I did this record that I don't know how many of our listeners will know, but it was like a kind of like a classic pop punk record 10 years ago that like absolute punk ate up. It was called, it's a band called Race to the Sun. It was called The Rest of Our Lives Is Tonight. And we made that record and chose which songs would be on that record by just saying, we want to make a record that when it's the first day of summer, you roll your windows down and you turn this record up as loud as you've ever turned up a record in your life. And so because of that, we had written some ballads, and we didn't put the ballads on the record. We just made songs that were just, let's rock. And so many people responded to that record. And I still get emails 10 years later, or like Reddit comments where people are like, that's one of my favorite, summer party down records. I'm like, that's exactly what we tried to make. And I think a lot of bands don't think about that when they're making a record.
Yeah, actually, that's something I'd like to talk to you more about, and that's something you can't really. I mean, we did put diverse emotionally, but like that's an intangible. I guess would be kind of the right word, right? And you said that
because it's subjective. It's about what you feel.
Right.
And music.
Yeah.
There's so many times that you find out a song is about how much somebody hates George Bush, and you're like, oh, I thought that was about your girlfriend being an asshole.
Right. And there's and we talked. I think we talked about this a little bit in the sense, and I said like in the sense that like I don't know if I listened to Untitled for the first time when I'm 24, if it would feel the same. And you take a record like Taking Back Sunday, Tell All Your Friends, like, I mean, you can say your own producer knowledgeable stuff, but like that obviously sounds really terrible compared to like Louder Now by them, right? Like it sounds awful.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the worst sounding.
It was a notoriously badly recorded record.
Yeah. And the producer even fucked with stuff without the band okaying it. Yeah, like there's so many stories.
Let me do a little defense here. Let's blame the engineers, not the producer.
Okay.
The producer was a different person on that record.
So, but you take that record, right? And to me, that is like, that for me, that was like, I'm 15. Everyone in my all-boys school just wants to listen to 50 Cent, and they're calling me like fat and gay because I like Blink-182.
You were fat?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I had no idea.
Really? I talk about that so much, huh?
I must have missed those tweets.
And so, like, to me, that record is like, it's, and, like, girl stuff, too. It's like that record is just pure feeling. Like, there's an intangible feeling listening to those songs. They might not be the best written songs, and sometimes, like, arguably, there are some really terrible Taking Back Sunday songs on that record.
But no, that record's amazing, genius,
like, what about, like,
straight through.
Like Bike Scene though, or like Head Club? Like those are songs I love though, but I don't think those are Taking Back Sunday's best
I think
song.
compositionally, that's one of the greatest records. Like they were the band that proved you can never have too much melody. Like
okay, I could talk up for hours on that record alone. That's like
we're gonna have a whole episode where we just Tell All Your Friends.
That would be great. There's so many chorus after chorus after chorus. It's just.
It's the best.
It is. So, but to me, that album, that's just like a pure feeling. Like, there's something that when I listen to that album, they captured a feeling, and it's intangible. And same thing for like to me, but for me, the Blink record isn't like it captured a feeling. That's just my favorite album of all time. Maybe that's because like the lyrics speak to me or whatever. But
You don't find there. I feel like at the end of that record, there's like a couple songs like once Stockholm Syndrome kicks in, onto the Robert Smith record. There's like this like anger and sadness thing that I really feel emotionally.
There's Stockholm Syndrome, there's a song Asthenia, and then there's like I'm Lost Without You, and those all carry, and same thing with the Roberts, with all of this. There is like a feeling, but the whole record isn't like that to me. Like Feeling This is like that is Blink-182. Feeling that if you have to pick one song to describe Blink-182,
that's the like song I hate them for,
and that's fair. But it's trading vocals. It's about sex and like chorus after chorus. Like that is what that's what Blink-182 is to me. But that doesn't necessarily feel like it's captured in a certain time versus like Tell All Your Friends, and it's like it doesn't matter what song, they just captured something in that room somehow, and I have no idea how they did it. And no one I don't know, you can tell me, but like, do you know that? Like when you're making a record that has a feeling, like can you tell?
There's two aspects of this. I can say this for certain. I've never made a record where that people liked where it was miserable making the record. You're usually having fun. Like, so like the other day I was doing sub stuff and it was like, I had one of the best sessions of my life. It was like super, super fun. It was just like amazing. We're dying laughing. And it's like, yeah, I think usually people really respond to that. But the second thing is I think that the studio is a very unself-aware environment. Here's a great example. When we were making the Somos record, I love those guys. They're great friends of mine. But I've made a lot of records where I've been like, man, I love this. This should be huge. But I have learned the humility that a lot of time when I think that my tastes don't line up with the world, and you don't know what the world's going to like. I don't think you know, and that's another reason I think you have to just emotionally respond and make decisions by how they make you feel. You listen to that music and you say, that felt good, and you do that. Whereas like you lay down that backing vocal harmony and it's like, that doesn't feel as good. Even though I want there to be a harmony there, we have to feel that didn't feel good and be honest with ourselves. I think that's a big thing. And no, I don't think you know when something's going to work and something's not. To that point, I remember even like a thing of like, I think it was actually Fugazi End Hits, which was a really hard decision between Red Medicine and I. They thought everybody was going to hate that record. And that's, for most people, I think that's the fan favorite, actually. Like, actually 13 songs and Repeater are the real fan favorites because those are the best-selling records of theirs. But most of the people I know, End Hits is their favorite record, and it was really hard for me to even choose between those two.
Yeah, I don't know. The feeling thing to me is just such a... Because it's intangible, it's so hard to wrap your head around. But and that again, the Mansions record to me, I think it took you a few. I think you like it now, right? But it took you a while.
I like that record. It's not anywhere near my favorite records, but like, great example is the other day it came on shuffle. I've been shuffling my iTunes lately because I'm reliving the early 2000s or something.
Okay.
It came on and I, immediately just went, nope, done shuffling. Let's hit play. This is the record I want to hear. This is what I'm feeling emotionally right now. And yeah, it's like a consistent record of just feels good.
Feels
but
terrible.
It is, yes, but that's what I've been in. I've been into masochistic feeling terrible lately. So, like I said earlier, I've been into the emo lately more than I ever have.
Yeah. So it's just like that's... And, we can derail on that because we can't actually hammer any of that in,
Yes.
And so that's just such a interesting thing to me.
Well, so let's go in on something that is tangible. So I remember you, me, and Thomas got drinks like last winter or something, and there was something that you said that was like, that always like sticks with me is like, we were talking about producers and you're like, I think it might have been Will Yip, and you're like, oh, he's the guy, like the guy you go to right now. Like, there's times when producers have a moment. Like, I can remember, like around the time of that Race the Sun record, it was just like that thing of like, everybody's like, yeah, you're killing it. And then Matt Squire came after me, and like,
There was in my memory, there was a very strict, like, 3 years of McTurnan a few years ago.
Oh, yeah. And, like, you have the moment. Like, Steve Evans, who, one of my best friends and mentors, he had, like, this long run where, like, he was the guy to go to. But here's the funny thing, is in our list, there's only three producers who have 2 records on our list. So, like, when it comes to producers, I always say this, and I talk about this a bunch in my book, is that, like, what makes a great record with the band is not going to the guy. It's finding a producer who fills in your blanks and knows how to do that thing that you're missing and understands your band. And I think that that's a huge, huge thing. But, like, overall, so the only 3 producers that are on this list twice are Jerry Finn and Steve Evans and Sal Villanueva.
God, I had no idea that Sal did the Thursday record until right now.
That's funny, yeah.
Wow.
He did that in Full Collapse.
Huh. Wow, it really was a case of engineers on Tell All Your Friends, huh?
It really was the case. I mean, I can remember when that record came out and people would just Absolute Punk was just a complaint forum for that.
Because War All the Time sounds great.
War All the Time sounds great. It's the same exact people making that record.
Interesting.
It's just them learning from their mistakes. And, like, I think you and I got in this on the time I was on the Absolute Punk podcast with you. So for me, North Star Is This Thing Loaded was the record that I got hell for, and which is kind of funny because North Star and Taking Back Sunday were like BFF, and those records came out, like, I think within a month of each other. But I got hell for that because that record is an amazing record, and the production's not what it should be because we didn't have enough time to make it or enough budget. But I should have figured out how to make that happen, and I learned from that, and never again did I make a record where I was the weak link. But I think there's a really interesting thing here of, like, most of this list is all different producers, and it's who complemented that band and was the right thing. Like, I think of a great example is Aaron Sprinkle on that Acceptance record. You have this amazing singer. Aaron's just notorious for being the best producer of vocals, and, like, he's so good at doing harmonies with the band. And then, like, you get, like, other things of just, like, I'm on your list, and, like, a perfect example is, like, I write harmonies, I'll tweak songs, I change things with the band, but I'm not like a John Feldman where I rewrite a song. I never do that. Like, I'm not a songwriter. I think that there's an interesting thing that it's not really about going to the guy that makes a great record. It's about finding the person who's going to complement your style and doing some research of, like, this person has a body of work that works well with what I do.
There are a few different things to me. Like, I think actually the Aaron Sprinkle one with Acceptance is, like, a perfect example. Like, to me, Aaron Sprinkle, when I know everything else he's done, to me, then I put it in context of that record, it's like he must have been a member of that band, like, while they were making that record in the studio. It's just like he just feels like
he was.
Yeah, and it's just like he was there. Like, I know, like, I can't imagine who else would have done that to make that record sound like that. It had to be him.
Yeah, he was the perfect choice.
Right, and similarly with Brand New, like, I know that they have actually worked with other producers, but Mike Sapone, to me, like, Brand New's guy. Same thing with Jerry Finn.
And that's an interesting thing that we realized in this too is, so, when Brand New made that version of Devil and God that they didn't put out, they made it with Dennis Herring, who's on this list, and he would have been another producer that had to, but they didn't put out the version they did with him. He also did Waves, King of the Beach, and lots of other great records. I think Dennis Herring's one of the best producers in the game. He consistently comes up on my list, but he doesn't come up on my list of punk because a lot of the records he does are not punk, but I think he's a king among men.
And then, I think the most important example of a producer to me would be, like, Jerry Finn, because he was involved in every single Blink-182 record around, and also so much other stuff. But to me, like, he was, and the band members will all say, like, when he died, like, they didn't know how to necessarily make their next record, and it took them 3 years because Jerry. Yeah.
Best compliment I ever received in my life was when somebody said, I feel like you're doing what Jerry Finn used to do with bands. I don't think that's even the least bit true because I'm not half the talent he was, but he was one of the greatest producers of all time.
I'm
shocked he's not on my list.
Yeah, there are just a few producers like that. And then, like, there's someone on a lesser popular level, but like I know what like a Paul Levitt record sounds like. Dangerous Summer, that sound fits really well. He's been recording with like Have Mercy, and I can be like, oh, that's probably what that band needed. Like it's in like you can tell certain things with certain producers. Like
I try so hard to not be that.
really.
You know, my production philosophy is I try to make the record the band wants.
Okay.
I tell them, when a band comes in, I tell them, play me 3 records of every sound you like, and I try to bring that together and make something unique for them. Because I don't want it to be a Jesse Cannon record. I want it to be this unique thing. I try to come up with a unique way to present every single band I work with that sounds like them, not like what I do with them. Now, will I say this, that I think, like, in general, you know, my guitars never have like a flat mid-range. Like, you know, I strive for some things, and there's certain emotional things that just don't feel right to me if I make a record like. But, you know, I mean, I'm also lucky enough. I work in so many different styles. Like, a lot of people may know me for pop punk, but, you know, I do more garage rock than I do pop punk by far.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just there are a few producers on my list or in my brain of my like music library that are like, yeah, like I think they were really important to that, or that sound was crafted with this producer. And then there's something like Real Talk by Man Overboard, and like I don't know what went into that album. You do, but like to me that's like that one's on my list because there's a very interesting, like not interesting, but there's a very clear path in my musical life. Like when that came out, like I wasn't really excited by anything pop punk that was going on. I was really like, I was getting deeper and deeper into like a brand new Manchester orchestra sort of direction, like that side of things. And then I remember getting the advance of Real Talk, and I put that on, and you know I had liked the upsides. Like 2010 was a year for me where it's like, oh my god, all of a sudden I am thrown back into pop punk, and it pushed me, and now I'm still here, right? Like to me, like Real Talk, not necessarily one of my favorite albums of all time, emotionally speaking, but it's like it is representative of where I am today, where Property Zack is today, and because of that, everywhere else I am today. And like if I had to pick like 3 albums that changed my life, not in like this saved my life kind of way, but like position me where I am, right? And that would be like the Blink record, the Brand New record, and then probably like Real Talk. And they were all very stylistically, life directionally changing for me. And like there's so many different categories of things to include.
Here's another one of the correlations we figured out. So I should say this is, so like there's only one record on our list that's self-produced, and that's the Mansions record. Mm-hmm. So one thing I would say is that, you know, not to be self-important, but producers are pretty important to making a great record. And all these bands recording themselves, you lose an objectivity. But I think with that objectivity loss, so you're talking about how you were alienated by pop punk, or like you weren't as into pop punk until that happened. And I had a huge alienation period during the like MySpace neon pop punk thing. Is like I hated that male model bullshit scene, and it just felt very disingenuous to me. But there was a big trope in that scene that you had to get the outside songwriter to write with you. You know, you got to get like this guy. He's going to spruce up your songs. He's going to do all this stuff for you. And there's no record on our list that has outside songwriters. And I thought that was so interesting when I figured that out last night. Is it's all bands being genuine and not going for that, like, let's go make the cool pop hit and we're going to work with these guys because they're the guy who did it and all this stuff. I found that period to just suck. It was the worst period of music. And I think it was really interesting. It was like when that died and you got like the Man Overboard, Wonder Years movement of bands, it was just more about like, let's do this genuine thing.
Yeah, to me, it was just honest. Like, I felt the honesty. Like, and not to bash someone like, this really isn't to bash someone like All Time Low, because I actually enjoy a lot of All Time Low's music, but like...
That makes one of us.
But, you know, they do write every record with someone, and it is really glossy, and it is like, I feel like there's more of a point to why they're writing the songs than the songs itself. And to me, like, when I first heard... Specifically, really, when I first heard Real Talk and Keep This to Yourself, I was like, oh, like I could relate to it on like an emotional level that I could have related to Tell All Your Friends when I first heard that. Like it felt different. And like it was very nice for me when stuff got like back to that basic level again, like from the start, from the ground up, and not like as like meaning. So like, you know, there aren't guest writers, and it was just like, you know, we're figuring this out in our practice space or in our basement at my parents' house kind of thing. Like, and that's sometimes that's how you make that song. Sometimes it's just you have nowhere else to write it and no other way to write it. It's just natural.
Yeah, and it's funny because with Man Overboard Real Talk, that was a very much a thing we were talking. We were talking about take back someday, tell all your friends, you know, as a feeling of like one of the things we wanted to evoke with that record, and we wanted that honesty. And it's funny because then after that, you know, they got outside songwriting help on subsequent records, but like, you know, there's part of me that I've really felt, and I've seen this over the years in my work, is that would I respond a lot of time when somebody else, like that other cook, comes into the kitchen, their melodic sense jumbles a record. It's even the same thing I try to do as a producer a lot of the time, is that when a band's like, oh, you know, like I'll have an idea for a part, but what I try to do instead, like when I can hear a guitar lead in my head and I'm like, oh, this will make the song, what I do instead is I say to the band, you should do a guitar lead here, and then see what they come up with, because a lot of the time the song's going to feel better if it's their sense of melody than me polluting the waters with my sense of melody that, you know, listens to weird dance music all day. And I think that that's a big thing, is that I think people haven't caught on to that trope yet, that there's something to when somebody brings in the outside force that feels a little plastic, and it just muddies the water to me. And I've felt that way for almost a decade now.
Yeah.
So we talked about, are there intros, and do the songs have like a thing where they made it so they all flow into each other? I think this was another thing, like the concept record thing of like, in a lot of cases, I find it kind of cheesy when the band finds a way to string all the songs together. And as much as that's fun to do in the studio, and boy, do I have a good time doing it, especially as a mastering engineer, there's something about, you know, just a collection of songs that you didn't go out of your way to like make some crazy musical idea flow into one another, that really just feels way better than that. But we do have a good amount of records on our thing that have intros and have song segs. Like, it looks like I have 3 and you have about the same.
Yeah, I think it's
two. Oh, 3. You actually, I have 2, you have 3, because I counted the, but you know, I don't think that that's necessary. Even though we do not seen that in the correlation, I don't think that's necessarily about the. I almost more admire and respect the band who can do smooth transitions and make intros and do it. How do you feel when you hear that stuff?
So there's 2 different things. Like there's on tape, and then that also gets into like live too. Like it's to me like, and that's a totally different conversation. But then when some of those bands can transition that into like the live show, that's another thing. But that I feel like is part of how they do it on the record maybe. But I'm not like a big intro guy. I am a big concept record guy, but I'm not necessarily like a big intro guy. And then when it comes to tying things together, musically, that matters a lot less to me, I think. Like, I'm when it comes down to enjoying music and songs and whatever, I am so much more invested in lyrics. And yeah, like, obviously, like, the music matters a whole bunch. If the lyrics to Untitled were over, like, pop stuff, like, I probably wouldn't like it, right? But, like, at the same time, the lyrics are so much more important to me. And so I might find I might find like pleasure from whatever, Soupy dropping a lyric 5 songs after he dropped the lyric the first time versus a guitar part being the same. In fact, because I might not notice that as much either. Like it may take me 10 times to be like, oh God, that's the same guitar part I didn't realize. Or that's like a transitional guitar part I didn't realize. And the thing actually, in one case where I really love it is on a Blink record where there's all Easy Target and then All of This, which is the Robert Smith song where it's a different speed, but it's the same exact chords transitioned. And that's something like where I can really appreciate that, because I think like those 2 songs specifically, they're about the same person, and the first song is like aggressive and the second song with Robert Smith is very sad and airy and like just sad. So I don't know. To me, I would probably leave it more than I'd take it, but it just really all, I guess, comes down to when it's done right. And then there are different kind of intros. Like the intro to Is a Real Boy by Say Anything. Like that's not a real intro. That's just Max Bemis like speaking into his thing and making a joke with like his dad or whatever, right? Or whatever, whoever. And like to me, like that is Say Anything. Like that's the kind of band Say Anything. It's like because like Max Bemis is a freak, and that's great. And to me, that
maybe should we say was a freak?
Was a freak. Boy.
Seems pretty normal these days.
Yeah, pretty normal. So to me, though, like that's part of that record. Like Max Bemis, like starting it off like a freak is why him being a freak on that record is so great. But then there's something like the Boxcar Racer record where there's like a minute or so of like, not like lame piano-y stuff, but like it just takes a while for the first song to hit. And I could do without that. I'd be just fine.
Agreed. I think that's the big thing is that maybe what with the great conclusion is intros don't matter that much. And I don't know that, there's something too that unless it's amazing, maybe you should leave it off. I think that would be my conclusion, unless it really emotionally adds to it. I think so many people get really into that thing of like they're trying to show what an artist they are and make a cool intro. But you hit on something that I would actually like to expand upon that we didn't do in this too. You were talking a lot about lyrics. Do you read lyrics?
Oh yeah,
really?
So for me, I am poster child for like AOL status message or whatever, like away message. Like up until I got my first serious girlfriend, because I was not allowed to do this anymore, I was poster child for like lyric on Facebook kind of thing.
Oh, Zack.
That was me, man. You're lucky that you only met me after this. But yeah, I love like lyrics I love it. Like a band to me matters so much more or will not matter at all depending on their lyrics. Like
I'm the same. And like, I can't, so like when I'm mixing records, I have to turn off the vocal when I'm doing the instruments because I listen to the lyric too much and lyrics are so important. But I'm also a big one, like, so like when I'm recording vocals, I work with the singer a lot to pronounce every word so somebody can hear the lyrics. And I only really like records that have really well pronounced lyrics because I don't want to read them. I don't find that an enjoyable part of the process. I want to listen to them, think about them, and I'll like put a song on repeat and like, really, really, really dig into the lyrics. Like, man, I've really gone so deep on Rented World lately because I love those guys' lyrics. Like, like one of my favorite things on that first record was sitting and discussing the lyrics with those awesome dudes, and I find that to be a thing, but I don't want to read them. There's very few bands, and it's usually for me the only bands I read the lyrics of are very political.
Mm-hmm. So, to me, like so Brand New, like I love to call Brand New like thinking man's emo.
Yeah, no, I think that Devil and God has some of the greatest lyrics ever written in the history of music.
Yeah, they're packed in. Like to me, like, and whether I want to read it or not, there's like that's something where it's like, oh God, I just love that. And similarly to like Tell All Your Friends, I don't need to read those lyrics, but I love Tell All Your Friends because on Cute Without the E, there could be that song could be broken up into 5 different songs based on like the verses and the choruses, and I love all of them. And it's like, to me, that's just so much. That's why I love it. I am so big on lyrics.
Yeah, I'm big on it. But so when you read lyrics, are you reading while you're listening to a record?
No, I won't sit down with this album and then like if I'm listening on vinyl, I won't pull out the lyric sheet. And if I'm listening, because I'm always listening to an album, I'm not like, I don't have like a separate tab up with stuff. But when it's like 9 o'clock at night and I've had like 2 glasses of wine and I am sad and I'm listening to whatever, a Hotel Year song, and there's this miserable thing, I will look that up. And I will be like, wow, yep, that's as sad as I thought it was. I will read it over a bunch of times. And I'll listen. Maybe I'll repeat that song a bunch of times just because of that lyric while I'm just staring at it. And that'll be that. But not on like there's not a daily thing where I'm like looking at a lyric page.
You're not consuming a record and like listening and reading along while he sings.
Right. However, like if this record is quickly becoming like one of my favorite records, let's say, I may invest that time because I'm probably becoming one of my favorite records because I want to be investing time in it because of how much it is meaning to me currently.
Got you. So I have two last points. I know we're getting a little long here. So I thought there was, while I wish I put Bikini Kill on, I just said, the thing while he's doing it. But you had Lydia. They have a female singer, right?
Well, so they had two different female band members, and they both they weren't like main singers, but they both provided. It was more of a melody thing almost.
So
Harmony.
Getting back to, you and I are both proud feminists. I think it's interesting that most of what we identified, like, I wish I put Bikini Kill on, but most of what we identify is the male thing. And I think that's an interesting testament to this. And
that's interesting too. Yeah, I was listening to this podcast earlier today with Soupy on this podcast Going Off Track, and they were talking about the Warped Tour problem thing that had made it away. And he was like, I'm not going to do it justice, so I actually won't go too into it. But, he explained this. He was like, well, look, like, Warped Tour wouldn't run without the, like, three women that literally put the festival together behind Kevin. And then on a baser level, he was like, the fans of the music that are coming out to these shows also generally happen to be white males. And, like, it's just harder to...
Is that really the case? Because I always...
Well, there are a lot of girls, certainly.
But in merch sale, when I would do analytics for bands I work with, it usually was pretty close to 50-50 of, like, who's buying the merch.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. I just think that, like... And I don't think I am barring... So I don't... Okay, so wait. A lot of my favorite...
One of my favorite things of this podcast is when you and I both have to sit and reassess what we've thought.
So... I mean, this is like the key go-to, right? But Paramore are truly one of my favorite bands. Like, I love Brand New Eyes is like a top 50 album to me. Their first album is, no one would consider that an emo album in today's emo revival, but to me, that is like one of my favorite emo albums of all time.
Got you.
But beyond that, someone like, I do listen to a lot of female-driven or guest, or not guest, but like, split band members, whether it's like a guy and a girl singer or something, music. Like, I think we're seeing more of that now, actually. Like, Tiger Straw is a great example, right? Like,
yes.
And I love Tiger Straw is one of my favorite younger bands. But yeah, that's interesting that there's only, did we say there's none or there's one? There's one.
Well, you had Lydia.
And, she isn't even on that release. That's the thing.
Oh, is she not?
This whole album, that whole album is about her leaving.
So technically we have none on our list.
Yeah.
I wished I put Bikini Kill on because that would have come up, let's say, higher than the Screeching Weasel record or even the Waves or Acceptance records. That, that's one of my favorite records of all time. But I do find it funny and interesting that, it is a thing about relation and to emotion. And I do think men and women are different emotionally for the most part. So I am on that side, even though... I don't know. There's part of me that wishes that I identified more with that. But so the last thing, and then we'll let our dear listener go. I thought it was really funny you said earlier that, before I started consuming vinyl and like how your record consumption is, because that wasn't an option for me. Like, there was so many records when I was growing up. One of my favorite punk records of all time is this band, Crimp Shrine.
Never heard of them.
So... Crimp Shrine later had members that were in Pinhead Gunpowder, which was the Green Day side project.
Okay, I do know that.
That record was only on vinyl. And there were so many 7-inches that were, if you wanted to hear this song from your favorite band, that you had to buy the vinyl. Like, one of my other favorite bands that I almost put on this list was Plow United.
Oh.
And the only reason I didn't put them on the list is that while that was my favorite record growing up, I even called them my favorite band growing up, it had no lasting value, and I can't even listen to the records as an adult. It's just a little too emotionally not where I'm at.
Right.
And it's kind of immature in my mind. But, they would put out tons and tons of 7-inches, the same with Screeching Weasel, that there would be no digital CD version of these songs, and you had to buy that vinyl. I think it's so interesting that no one does that today.
Yeah, that is. I can't think of anyone actually that does that.
Yeah, like there's no rarefication. That's not a word. There's, I don't know the word, but I know that's not one. There's no scarcity, maybe is the word, in that no band keeps their music to that. And it was the bassist in my band when. One of the last bands I was in was a band called The Curse of Yakub. And the bassist of that band, he does a thing like where he like intentionally keeps his music off the internet, and I find that to be very silly and ridiculous, and it's also why they're not popular, even though I think they make great music. But there's part of me that thinks that's a good thing that no one does that. But then there's part of me that's a little like, oh, well, that's sad. That was a part of culture that was really interesting, that you had to buy this vinyl if you wanted to hear this.
Yeah, no, that sounds like such an interesting thing to me. It sounds like something I'd really actually enjoy. But it's just
that you had to buy the vinyl.
Well, not that I had to buy the vinyl, but just like, yeah, like you got to sit through it all the way through. Like that appeals more to me as someone like that isn't putting a playlist together. You know.
I guess we know the future of Bad Timing Records.
Yeah, all Jade Tree too.
Oh yes, I forgot your two-headed dragon.
That's just. Thank you to everyone for listening to Off the Record this week. Head to offtherecord.fm to check out show notes, to leave us any feedback. Jesse can be found at Twitter at Jesse Cannon. I'm at Zarrillo, and our podcast is at Off the Record FM. We'll be back next week.